So I have a friend who's a hooker, and I asked her if she had any embarrassing moments while hooking. Well, she told me one night she was standing on the corner waiting for her last trick. And finally, an old man in his late 60s walked up to her and asked her how much. So she told him it'll be $60 for 30 minutes. And then the old man asked her if he could just pay $70 for 30 minutes and no limit. So she ended up agreeing to the deal and he paid. Well, anyways, they got into his car and went to his hotel room. And as soon as they got there, they got undressed and got into bed. She told me he only took 3 minutes and then he got out of bed and went over to the window. And after he opened the window, he stuck his head out and took a deep breath, like he was out of breath or something. But she said the strange thing was after he closed the window, he dropped down to the floor and slid underneath the bed. And then he popped up on the other side of the bed. And then he got back on top of her, but this time he only finished in 2 minutes. And again, he ran over to the window, took some deep breaths, and slid back under the bed and popped up on the other side of the bed. She said he repeated this sequence 6 times in 30 minutes. And after he was done, she got up out of bed, then got dressed and started to leave. But she stopped at the door wondering why he kept going under the bed. She thought maybe he had some medicine under there to help with his stamina. So she knelt down beside the bed to look underneath. And at this point, she couldn't believe her eyes. She saw 5 more naked old men. So me and my husband decided to take a walk in the park yesterday because it was beautiful outside and we just wanted to enjoy the weather. Well, we decided to sit down on a bench because we was walking around the park for a couple of hours. So we were cuddling on the bench and then my ear started hurting out of nowhere. I said to my husband that my ear was hurting me and then he tried to be romantic and started kissing me gently on my ear. He then asked me did it feel better now and I started giggling and I told him that the pain was all gone. But then I pointed to my neck and told him that I felt some pain there too. That's when my husband held my face and started kissing me on my neck very slowly. He said, "Does that feel better now, sweetheart?" That's when I smiled at him and I told him that it was all healed. And after that, I pointed to my chest and I told my husband that I had a little bit of chest pain. My husband smiled at me and then started kissing me slowly on my chest. We were getting hot and ready on that bench. And after a couple of kisses on my chest, I told my husband that it was all good now. And that's when we heard this old man who was sitting on a bench right next to us. He said, "Excuse me, but that was really impressive. Does your husband heal hemorrhoids as well?" So today I'm at home by myself because my husband is at work, so I decided to do a little cleaning around the house. And while I'm doing the dishes, I heard a knock at the door, and when I asked who is it, nobody answered. So I looked through my peephole, and it's somebody that I don't even recognize. But it's a man, so I'm thinking he's a friend of my husband, so I go ahead and open the door. And out of nowhere, this man asks me, do I have a vajayjay? Now I'm standing there looking confused because obviously he can see that I'm a woman. So why are you asking me if I have lady parts, knowing that I have lady parts? But anyways, I didn't even answer the man. I just slammed the door in his face and I went back to cleaning my house. Well, a couple of hours passed and I hear another knock at my door. And when I opened my door, it was the same man from earlier asking me the same question. Do I have a vajayjay? Well, this time I said to him, I don't know why you're at my door, but when my husband come home, he'll deal with you. And that's when I slammed the door in his face again. So later on in the day, my husband comes home and I tell him what happened. And then my husband said to me, well, if that man comes back tonight, I want you to answer the door and I'll hide behind the door and listen. This time he wanted me to say yes to the man's question just to see where he was going with this. So my husband is in the living room watching TV and I'm in the kitchen making dinner, and sure enough, the same man knocked on our door. But this time my husband got up and ran to the door before me, and that's when he told me to pretend like he's not even there. So I opened the door and the man asked me the question again. Do I have a vajayjay? And this time I told him yes, just like my husband told me to do. And that's when the man looked at me and said, well, would you mind telling your husband to leave my wife's alone and start using yours? So I remember when I was a new mom and I had to take the bus to get to my mother's house. And my newborn baby wakes up from her nap and she starts crying, but that only meant she was ready to be fed. So I look into her diaper bag to see if she had any bottles left, but I forgot. Before we had got on the bus, she had drunk her last bottle. And the only thing left for me to do was to breastfeed her. So I lifted her up out her car seat so I can breastfeed her, but she wouldn't take it. But there was this man sitting right next to us, so I decided to use him to get my baby to eat. So I told my daughter if she didn't eat, I'll have to give it to this nice man sitting right next to us. But 10 minutes passed and my baby still didn't want to latch on. And that's when I said, please eat, honey, because if you don't, I'll have to give it to this nice man here. And for some reason, my baby still didn't want to latch on. And at that point, I was getting stressed out because she wouldn't stop crying. And I knew she was hungry because when I gave her an empty bottle, she was trying to drink from it. And that's when I tried to get her to latch on to my breast again. I said, honey, if you don't eat, this man right here is going to be very lucky. But like 2 minutes later, the man just started yelling. He said, come on, kid, make up your mind, because I was supposed to get off 5 stops ago. So yesterday I was driving and I got pulled over by a police officer. And this made me really nervous because every time I get pulled over, I get a ticket. And I didn't even know why I was getting pulled over. But anyways, he walked up to my window and asked me to roll it down. So that's what I did. And just when I was about to ask him what the problem was, he handed me a check for $6,000. He said, congratulations, you just won $6,000 for wearing your seatbelt. I guess it was a safety competition going on and I didn't know nothing about it. And then the police officer asked me what was I going to do with the prize money. I hesitated for a minute and then I said, I guess I'll go to driving school to get my license. And right after I said that, my best friend who was sitting in the passenger seat told the officer to not listen to me because I'm a smart aleck when I'm drunk. And that's when I looked at her and started laughing, but my laughing woke up my cousin who was laying in the back seat. And when my cousin saw the cop, he just started panicking. He said, man, I knew we weren't finna get nowhere in this stolen car. And at that moment, I just looked at the police officer and nervously smiled at him. But not too long after that, there was a knock coming from the trunk. And the voice from the trunk said, hello, are y'all gonna let me go? I used to love growing tomatoes, but for some reason I couldn't get them to turn red. Well, one day I was walking in my neighborhood and then I passed my neighbor's house and I seen he had this beautiful garden full with huge red tomatoes. Now, even though I didn't know him, I still went to go knock on his door just to ask him how did he get his tomatoes so red. And after I asked him the question, he told me he would just stand in front of his tomato garden twice a day, butt naked. He said his tomatoes turned red from blushing so much. Now, of course, I thought he was just flirting, but what if he was actually right? So I decided to go home and stand in front of my tomato garden butt naked just to see if it'll work. And I did this 3 times a day for 2 weeks, hoping for the best. Well, one day my neighbor was walking past my house and I was sitting on the porch. And then he asked me, well, how did it go? Did your tomatoes finally turn red? I looked up at him and said, no, but you wouldn't believe what happened to my cucumbers. He said, well, what happened to your cucumbers, ma'am? And that's when I said they grew enormous. So I remember when I was in the 6th grade and our teacher was giving us a quiz. She was holding an object behind her back and she wanted us to guess what the object was. So she told the class that she had something red and round and we could eat it. And then she said, what is it? And that's when the whole class raised their hand to answer the question. And she called on Chelsea and Chelsea asked her, was it an apple? The teacher said, it's not an apple, it's a tomato, but it shows your thinking. And after that, the teacher moved on to the next object. She said, I've now got something round and it has a greenish color and you can also eat this. And a boy named Jerome yelled out and said, oh, that's easy, that's a grape. The teacher said, no, it's an onion, but it shows your thinking. Now the teacher went to go get another object, but before she could, Mark, the class clown, told the teacher that he had an object. Now at first the teacher didn't even want him to speak, but since this was his first time getting involved in a lesson, she let him. And that's when Mark said, I've got something under my desk that's an inch long, white, and it has a red end. And the teacher got so angry, she called him a dirty little boy, and then she told him to get out the classroom. And then he said, no, it's a match, but it shows you were thinking.